If you've never sprayed a set of kitchen cabinets, this video is going to help you feel more comfortable with the process. Or if you're a pro who sprayed many sets of kitchen cabinets, there's going to be lots of little tips and tricks to help out your processes here. We're going to break this process down into 3 parts. Number 1, prep. We're going to talk about the products and the processes I use to prep cabinets. Number 2, we're going to talk about the machinery, HVLP, airless, air-assisted airless. And number 3, we're going to talk about coatings, water-based, oil, hybrids, and lacquers. The most important step of painting your kitchen cabinets is prep. I know you've heard it before, that prep is key, but it really is. I can't overemphasize the importance of prep work. The first step in our process is actually laying down floor protection. When our crew leaders and our apprentices show up at a job site, we have lots of gear to carry in. We're going to be making multiple trips from, let's call it the kitchen, out through a door to one of our vehicles. So we lay down a rubberized flooring protection from the door in a trail all the way to the kitchen. We use low-tack painter's tape to adhere our flooring protection to the floor so it doesn't shimmy around and move. And now we have a permanent trail from our way out of the house and into the house to our job site. When we're in the actual job site, we use a number of things for the floor protection. There's the craft paper, rosin paper, builder's paper that's readily available, cheap, easy to use. We use a series of that to protect the countertops and floors. You can also use rubberized roofing underlayment that's available at a lot of big box stores. The benefit to something like that is you're not going to get any solvent or paint or coating leak through into a wood floor or a floor underneath. It's a little tougher too. For those of you who have been on a job site for multiple weeks, extended weeks, if you have standard floor paper down, it can get chipped up, it can get ripped, and you have to do a series of taping and fixing. With the rubberized flooring or rubberized roofing underlayment, you don't get that problem. It's much tougher. Comes with a little more expense, but in the long run, it's well worth it. So now that we have our flooring protection down, we're going to actually talk about what to do with the cabinets themselves. First thing we do is get rid of all the doors and drawers. We take all of that to our finishing shop to spray, so we want to take it off in an orderly way so that when it's done being finished, we can put it back on. Door or drawer comes off, hinges come off of the back, and we have a numbering system that numbers them top to bottom, left to right, starting with the number 1. So in a typical kitchen, we look for the upper cabinets all the way to the left. The first door that comes off, this one, we would take a hinge off and you're left with a little hinge cup hole on the back that will not be seen after you put the hinge back on. So we label that with a permanent marker, number 1. And then we rip off a tiny piece of tape, just enough to cover the number, and put that over the number. Obviously, this is so we don't paint over our numbering system, and that when all these are done, you can put them back in their same place. When all the doors and drawers are off and numbered, we have a bunch of hardware to deal with. We put those in plastic bags. We label them, this one cabinet number 1, and I prefer to leave them on site, actually in the backs of the cabinets. So when we take off all our prep work to install again, it's a dummy-proof system of what goes where. It's all there. You're not going to lose any screws. You're not going to lose any hinges. So now that the doors and drawers are gone, hardware's off, labeled, we're ready to actually do something to the cabinets. So now we're going to seal off with plastic the insides of these cabinets. Very crucial step if you want to keep the insides clean. We're going to be spraying with high pressure paint in most situations, and we want to protect everything that's not the 3/4 inch return here and the face frame of this cabinet. This step might be a little different than most professional painters do. I like to actually step my plastic back a little bit. And by that I mean we take 1.5 inch low-tack painter's tape and we make a single border around the entire inside of the cabinet first. This allows you to do a few things. You can get a nice tight seal on the bottom, all your corners are tight here, and then when you go to take your 3M hand masker plastic like this, you rip off a piece just wider than the top of the cabinet. When you have your piece ripped off, you adhere it to the top, press it down nice and tight. The corners are a little bit longer than the width of the cabinet, so you curl your corners down. What this creates is the tight corners where the plastic comes around the inside of the corners and you're not likely to have those little pinholes in the corner where paint can go by. So you have your plastic adhered to the top, you extend it all the way down to the bottom of the cabinet. Biggest tip I can give you here, I see a lot of my apprentices struggle with this if you don't give them the right education with it. You take 2 small pieces of the low-tack painter's tape and you adhere each corner of the plastic. So you extend it down, you pull it nice and tight, tack it in each corner like that with a small piece. At this point, I like to seal up those corners with those small pieces of tape as well. You're not going to get a pinhole in there. At this point, you have a nice tight piece of plastic. You take your low-tack painter's tape again, seal off one side completely, seal off the other side completely, and then what you're left with is the bottom. Seal that off as well. Another tip as well, my fingers are a little too big to get great seals in these little tight inside corners, so we use putty knife painter's tool to aid in getting a nice tight seal in all the corners like that. Also, when you have a flush face frame with the bottom of the cabinets, this one has a slight 1/8 inch lip here, so it's not too bad, but when your face frame goes flush with here, your painter's tape has to make a perfect line. In order not to get any bleed through, pushing it down with a painter's tool or a putty knife is key. So after your tape goes on, press the edge down and you won't get any of that bleeding through there. So at this point, we have the insides of our cabinets completely sealed off and we're ready to do something to the actual cabinets to make paint stick to them. If you do not want your kitchen cabinets to peel, you must go through a process that my company calls SVT. Sand, vac, and tack. Now very simply, we sand the cabinets not only to smooth out the surface here, we actually sand them to rough them up on the micro level. It creates what we call tooth. The more you sand a cabinet like this, you're creating little micro abrasions in there, and it's hills and valleys, so that when you do put your primer on, there's more total surface contact area between the primer and the surface. Now also, before you sand, you're gonna have to look for any cracks, joints in the cabinets. If you're replacing old style hardware with hidden hinge hardware, you're gonna have a couple hinge holes here too. You wanna use some wood filler on that. Fill those, obviously mound it out a little more than flush so you have something to sand. And any other defects you have in your cabinets, I prefer wood filler. It's harder, like yes it is harder to sand it as well, but if you just use a drywall spackle or a drywall mud, it's too soft and you'll end up denting whatever you patch. So you have all the imperfections, all the dents, all the cracks, all the old screw holes of hardware that you're going to replace. They're all patched. You can start the SVT process. Simply, you use a series of random orbital sanders, any sort of electric rotary tools. I prefer about a 150 or a 180 grit paper. Medium grit sanding sponge or fine grit sanding sponge is good as well for all the tight areas. And you basically start very methodically sanding the areas that you're going to be painting. Now, this is not woodworking sanding. You're not removing wood. You're not looking to make a completely polished surface. You're looking to create tooth like we talked about. If you've done a thorough job of sanding, you're gonna see what's white powder on there. This is the old finish that's powdering up on there. If you really want your cabinets to not peel, you must remove all this stuff. So the SVT portion, the sanding is done. Now you must vac off most of the dust, and then we use a microfiber towel to get the rest of it off. So simply put brush attachment on a shop vac, and you methodically work through getting off all the white powder that you created from the sanding. Now what you're going to notice is that there's a fine little layer of dust left over, even after vacuuming. That's what the tack rag's for. So we dunk ours in water until it's completely saturated, wring it out completely till there's almost no water left, and then very methodically wipe all the surfaces of the cabinet to remove any bit of the final dust. This is what you call squeaky clean. When you rub your finger across it, it makes a squeaking sound, nothing comes off on your finger again, and you're now ready to prime.